Hey there! Welcome to 20 Minutes to Change, the podcast where every day we dive into powerful lessons from the world's best books to help you shift your mindset, build wealth and peace at the same time, and design a life you truly love. If you're looking for personal growth, financial freedom, or even just a little spark to start something new, you're in the right place. Don't forget to subscribe, because sometimes one sentence, one idea, or one new perspective is all it takes to change your entire life. So, are you ready? Let's begin today's episode. When Robert Kiyosaki was a young boy in Hawaii, he had two fathers. One was his real father, educated, intelligent, and hardworking. The other was his best friend's father, a man who never finished college but built businesses, invested, and became wealthy. Both men were good, kind, and cared deeply about their families. But they had completely different ways of thinking about money. Robert's real father, the one he called his poor dad, believed in education, job security, and climbing the corporate ladder. He said things like, go to school, get good grades, and find a safe job. He believed that a stable paycheck and a pension were the keys to success. But his rich dad had a very different philosophy. He said, the rich don't work for money, money works for them. He taught Robert that if you spend your life chasing a paycheck, you'll always be controlled by fear. Fear of losing your job, fear of not having enough, fear of the next bill coming due. One day, when Robert was only 9 years old, he and his friend Mike asked Rich Dad to teach them how to make money. Rich Dad didn't just give them the answer. He gave them an experience. He hired them to work in one of his small stores for just 10 cents an hour. After weeks of working hard, Robert got frustrated. He told Rich Dad, "You're not paying us enough." Rich Dad smiled and said, "Good. You're starting to feel what most people feel all their lives: anger and frustration." That's how the poor and middle class stay trapped. They work for money, not for learning. Robert realized something powerful that day. The moment you let emotions like fear and greed control you, money becomes your master. But when you learn how it really works, you become the master of money. That was his first big lesson. Don't work for money. Learn how money works, so it can work for you. When Robert was growing up, both of his fathers believed education was the key to success. But they didn't agree on what kind of education mattered most. His poor dad believed in traditional education, school, college, degrees. His rich dad believed in financial education, understanding how money really works. Most people, Rich Dad explained, think that making more money will solve their problems. But that's not true. If you don't know how to manage money, more of it will only make the problem bigger. It's not how much you earn. It's how much you keep and how you make it work for you. Rich Dad taught Robert the most important rule in wealth building: the rich buy assets. The poor and middle class buy liabilities, but they think they're assets. An asset is something that puts money into your pocket, like a business, an investment, or property that earns income. A liability is something that takes money out of your pocket, like your house, your car, or your debts. Poor Dad often said, "Our house is our greatest asset." But every month, that house took money out of his pocket through the mortgage, taxes, and maintenance. Rich Dad smiled and said, "That's not an asset. That's a liability." This simple shift in perspective changed Robert's life. He began to see that most people stay broke, not because they don't work hard, but because they don't understand the difference between assets and liabilities. Rich Dad explained it like this: if you want to be rich, you must first understand numbers. Learn to read financial statements like others read novels. He taught Robert how to see the cash flow pattern of different people. The poor earn money and spend it immediately. The middle class earn money and buy liabilities, thinking they're assets. The rich focus on acquiring real assets that generate income, even when they're asleep. Financial literacy isn't taught in schools because schools prepare people to be employees, not owners. They train people to work for someone else, not to build something of their own. That's why Rich Dad always said, "It's not about working harder, it's about thinking smarter." Robert realized that financial freedom doesn't come from earning more money. It comes from knowing how to make that money work for you. As Robert grew older, his rich dad kept reminding him of one lesson: mind your own business. At first, Robert thought that meant starting a company. But Rich Dad explained, it doesn't mean you have to quit your job. It means you must always focus on building your own assets, even while you work for someone else. Most people spend their entire lives working for others. They work for their employers, they work for the government through taxes, and they work for the bank through mortgage payments. They think they have a career, but they don't own anything that truly works for them. Rich Dad said, while you're working hard for others, never forget to build something for yourself. He wanted Robert to understand that a job is temporary security, but assets are long-term freedom. The problem, he said, is that most people confuse their profession with their business. A doctor might say, "My business is medicine," but if all her income comes from her labor, she owns a job, not a business. Rich Dad defined a true business as something that makes money whether you're there or not. That's why he encouraged Robert to start buying small assets early. Even if they were small investments like stocks, rental properties, or intellectual property that could generate income. Robert's poor dad used to say, "I can't afford that." Rich Dad taught him to change the question, "How can I afford it?" That simple change of words shifts your brain from limitation to creativity. Instead of closing the door, it opens possibilities. Rich Dad explained that wealth is not about having a fancy job title or a big salary. It's about how much time you can live without working and still maintain your lifestyle. That's what financial freedom truly means. He said, if you stop working today and your income keeps coming in, that's when you're rich. So while Robert's friends were focused on promotions, pay raises, and buying bigger houses, Robert started focusing on his own financial foundation, building assets, not just a resume. By his 20s, Robert understood that minding your own business meant taking charge of your financial future. It meant building streams of income that didn't depend on a paycheck. It meant understanding that freedom isn't something you're given. It's something you build. When Robert was a young man, Rich Dad told him something that completely changed how he saw the world. He said, "The rich understand laws, and they use them to their advantage." Robert didn't understand at first. He thought laws were the same for everyone. But Rich Dad explained that while the rules might look the same, the knowledge of those rules isn't, and that difference separates the rich from everyone else. He taught Robert that taxes were originally created to punish the rich, but ended up hurting the poor and middle class the most. In the beginning, only the wealthy paid taxes. Over time, governments realized they could collect money from everyone, and they promised that taxing the rich would help the poor. But that's not what happened. Why? Because the rich learned how to own nothing but control everything. They created corporations, legal entities that earn money, spend before paying taxes, and protect personal assets. Meanwhile, employees earn money, pay taxes first, and then try to live on what's left. Rich Dad broke it down simply. The poor and middle class work for money. The rich make money work for them and use corporations to protect it. He showed Robert how a corporation works. Money comes in, expenses get paid. What's left is taxed. But for employees, it's reversed. Income gets taxed first, and only then you pay expenses. That's why Rich Dad said financial education is power, because it gives you the ability to understand the game and play it smart. It's not about cheating the system. It's about understanding it better than others. Robert's poor dad worked hard, paid his taxes faithfully, and complained about how unfair the system was. Rich Dad smiled and said, "Don't fight the system. Learn it. That's how you win." One day, Rich Dad told Robert, "Money isn't real." It's just an idea. Robert was confused. How could money not be real when everyone spent their lives chasing it? Rich Dad explained that opportunities come and go every day, but only those who are trained financially can see them. The rich don't wait for luck. They create their own opportunities. He said, "You must learn to take calculated risks. The biggest risk is to play it safe." Most people are afraid of losing, so they never win. They save money in the bank, where inflation eats it away. They say things like, "I can't afford to lose." But Rich Dad reminded Robert, the difference between the rich and the poor is how they handle fear. The rich learn from failure. They see mistakes as lessons, not as the end. The poor let fear paralyze them, while the rich let curiosity drive them. Rich Dad encouraged Robert to think outside the box, to look for deals others didn't see, to spot undervalued opportunities, and to make money move. He said, "Your mind is your greatest asset. Train it well, and money will follow." Over time, Robert learned that financial intelligence means combining knowledge from accounting, investing, marketing, and the law. When those areas come together, opportunities appear where others only see problems. Rich Dad's final words on this lesson were clear. The rich invent money. They don't wait for it. They create it through ideas, courage, and education. After college, Robert's poor dad encouraged him to find a stable job. He believed that climbing the corporate ladder was the path to success. But Rich Dad had a different vision. He said, "Don't work for money, work to learn." Rich Dad explained that every job should teach you a skill, not just give you a paycheck. Sales, communication, management, investing, those were the real tools of wealth. He told Robert that people who only focus on their salary trap themselves in the rat race. Rich Dad said, "If you want to be rich, you need to master more than one skill. The more you learn, the more you earn." Robert took that advice seriously. He worked in different industries, learning how to sell, how to lead, and how to build teams. Every time he learned something new, his value increased. Not because of his degree, but because of his experience. Poor Dad used to say, "I deserve a raise." Rich Dad would say, "You deserve to learn." And that mindset made all the difference. Rich Dad also warned Robert about ego, the voice that says, "I already know that." He said, "The moment you stop learning, you start dying financially." Robert realized that true education happens outside the classroom, in the real world, through action, mistakes, and growth. So he stopped chasing promotions and started chasing knowledge. And that decision shaped the rest of his life. By the time Robert was an adult, he realized that the biggest barriers to wealth weren't out in the world. They were inside people's minds. Fear, cynicism, laziness, bad habits, and arrogance, those were the real enemies of success. Rich Dad said, "Everyone wants to be rich, but few are willing to face the emotions that stop them." The first emotion is fear, the fear of losing money. Most people let fear paralyze them, so they never take action. The rich lose money too, but they learn from every loss and keep moving forward. Rich Dad said, "The difference is how fast you recover." Then comes cynicism, listening to other people's doubts. Robert saw how people talk themselves out of opportunities by saying, "What if it doesn't work?" Rich Dad would reply, "What if it does?" Next is laziness. Not the kind where you do nothing, the kind where you're busy with things that don't matter. People say, "I don't have time," but what they really mean is, it's not a priority. Then there are bad habits. Spending before saving, living paycheck to paycheck, waiting for the weekend. Rich Dad taught Robert to pay himself first, even when money was tight. He said, "Discipline yourself to invest before you spend." The poor pay everyone else first. The rich pay themselves first. And finally, arrogance. The moment you think you already know everything, you stop learning, and that's when you start losing. Rich Dad said, "Money doesn't make you smart. Humility keeps you growing." Robert learned that conquering these 5 inner enemies was more important than chasing any investment deal. Because no matter how much you know, if your emotions control you, you'll never be free. Many people asked Robert, "How do I start?" Rich Dad always said, "You start by changing your mindset." It's not about having money to invest. It's about learning how to see opportunities. Money follows vision, not the other way around. Rich Dad gave Robert 10 simple steps to build financial confidence. 1. Find a reason greater than reality, something that drives you. 2. Choose daily discipline over momentary pleasure. 3. Surround yourself with people who are smarter than you. 4. Learn before you earn. 5. Pay yourself first. 6. Buy luxuries last, not first. 7. Keep learning. 8. Build assets before upgrading lifestyle. 9. Invest in things you understand. 10. Teach others what you learn. He reminded Robert that action builds confidence, not theory. Every small investment, every lesson learned, builds your financial muscle. Poor Dad often said, "I can't afford to take risks." Rich Dad said, "You can't afford not to." Robert realized that the secret wasn't in finding the perfect investment. It was in becoming the kind of person who could handle any investment wisely. By this point, Robert's life was changing. He was learning, investing, and teaching others. But Rich Dad reminded him that education never ends. He told him, "If you want to stay rich, keep growing." That meant reading books, attending seminars, surrounding himself with mentors, and constantly improving his mindset. Rich Dad's rule was simple: you become who you spend time with. So if you spend your time with people who talk about growth, money, and ideas, you'll grow. If you spend it with people who complain, you'll stay stuck. Rich Dad also encouraged Robert to give back, to teach what he learned. He said, "The more you give, the more you receive. The universe rewards contribution." That's why Robert began sharing these lessons with others, so people could learn to think differently about money and stop living in fear. In the end, Robert realized that Rich Dad, Poor Dad wasn't just about money, it was about freedom. Freedom from fear. Freedom from dependency. Freedom to live life on your own terms. His two fathers had given him a choice: follow the traditional path of job security and struggle, or embrace financial education and build independence. Rich Dad's lessons changed his life forever. Don't work for money, make money work for you. Buy assets, not liabilities. Mind your own business. Work to learn, not to earn. Overcome your fears and doubts. Keep learning, teaching, and growing. Robert dedicated his life to sharing those lessons so others could break free from the rat race and start building a future they control. Because in the end, wealth isn't about how much money you make, it's about how you think. And that's it for today's episode of 20 Minutes to Change. If something in this episode sparked a thought or made you see things differently, hold on to that. Because that's where change begins. You're only 20 minutes away from a better version of yourself. 20 minutes to build a stronger mind and create a life you choose to live. If this episode helped you in any way, hit that like button and tell me in the comments what part inspired you the most. And of course, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I'm Luna, and this is 20 Minutes to Change, where every day we take one small step closer to a better life. See you in the next episode.